Breaking the Set recently took a trip to Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Pine Ridge is one of the poorest counties in the U.S., and the conditions there are comparable to developing countries. This is partly why Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and social critic Chris Hedges has referred to places like Pine Ridge as capitalism's sacrifice zones. However, this systemic subjugation is as old as civilization itself. Earlier today, Chris joined me to talk about the roots of institutionalized inequality and reasons behind the collapse of complex societies. I first asked him why places like Pine Ridge are so susceptible to such extreme poverty.
These are places where unfettered capitalist forces backed by force on behalf of the railroad companies, timber merchants, the people who profited from decimating the buffalo herds, mining concerns, came in and seized the land of Native Americans and killed most of them. And not only that, but after herding them into what in essence were prisoner of war camps, set out to destroy their culture, their religion, their language. It's why Indian children were taken from their parents and put in Christian boarding schools where they were not allowed, for instance, in Pine Ridge, to speak Lakota. And what's happening now with the late end of the industrial age and capitalism is that the reservation, that environment that Native American people have endured and suffered under is being extended, growing in greater and greater areas. You know, we're all being sacrificed as the residents of Charleston, West Virginia, were sacrificed when their water was poisoned by colchicine. It's still poisoned, although they've been told to drink it. Children are coming home from school sick. This is not something that is unknown to Native Americans. And I think that whole demented project of ceaseless exploitation, expansion, and violence, the template of that was set in the westward expansion.
You discuss how the world is globally integrated under an unsustainable form of capitalism, but America positions itself atop the totem pole justified by the notion of American exceptionalism. How do you think that that notion plays into the global collapse?
Well, corporations are preying on the United States in the way that they prey on all nation states. They are, in this essence, supranational. They owe no loyalty to any one nation. And that's how you have seen the decimation of the American manufacturing base. That is how you have seen the transference of capital overseas, where it lies beyond the reach of taxation. You have seen the rise, the decimation of the working class, and the rise of tremendous numbers of poor, whether they're listed as in poverty or a category called near poverty. We're now talking about half the country. And the myth of America is still there. The idea that if you work hard, you can make something of yourself. The idea that we have a right to travel the globe and impose our virtues, supposed virtues, on other countries by force, which is what we are doing, attempting to do throughout the Middle East, although it's not going very well for us. Look, you know, imperialism has always been a mask for trade, for business, for control of natural resources. That is true, has been true since the United States began its imperialist expansion with the conquest of the Philippines, Cuba, the control of the Caribbean for sugar, bananas into the Middle East for the control of oil. So what we're seeing is a kind of clash between the myth that America once used to identify itself, and let's not forget that, you know, many of the most fervent supporters of imperialist expansion came from labor unions. I mean, Gompers was at the Versailles Treaty. I mean, all segments of the society are complicit, but these forces, which in essence kind of cannibalize both the natural environment and exploit human labor, and have been doing this on the outer reaches of empire for decades, are now being done internally, just as it was done in the original conquest of the United States against Native Americans.
You talk about the impending environmental catastrophes and also severe economic uncertainty on the horizon. Why do you think there's no sense of urgency on a large scale to address these troubling trends?
Well, because they're not reported. The commercial media is about bread and circus. It's about spectacle. It's about celebrity gossip. It's about the Super Bowl. I mean, every week it's something new. You know, if we had a responsible media, especially a broadcast media, we would understand that climate change at this point is an emergency. You know, at this point, the effects of climate change are unstoppable. And if we don't radically reconfigure our relationship with the ecosystem very, very quickly, the human species itself is in jeopardy. And you can look at the World Bank report on climate change, Turn Up the Heat. The World Bank can hardly be accused of being a radical organization, and they speak at the end of that report in utterly apocalyptic terms. So, you know, scientists, especially people who study climate change, they know very well what's happening, and yet we're not hearing their voices. We are mesmerized by electronic hallucinations, and that's, of course, how corporations want it. When 40% of the summer Arctic sea ice melts, corporations like Shell Oil look at the death throes of our planet as a business opportunity, and they run up and drop $500 million drill bits down into the Arctic Sea. I think what we have seen is a kind of iron control of the systems of information by corporate power, who are determined to exploit and exploit and exploit until collapse. And now we're, of course, about to see, in all likelihood, the president approve the northern leg of the Keystone or XL pipeline. So it's an uninformed public. It's a public which has been diverted. Their emotional and intellectual energy has been invested into spectacle, coupled with a kind of ruthless corporate totalitarianism that thinks only in terms of quarterly profit and has absolutely no concern for not only the common good, but the very sustenance of the ecosystem that might provide some kind of decent and acceptable living standards for future generations.
Chris, but on the flip side, you've also said that as collapse becomes palpable, humanity will retreat into what anthropologists call crisis cults. What is a crisis cult, and why does our psychological hardwiring always revert back to these modes of groupthink?
Well, when things become so desperate, you retreat, or human societies retreat into forms of magical thinking. At the end of the Indian Wars and the latter part of the 19th century, you saw the rise of the ghost dance, which swept through the remnants of native communities. These communities believed that the Great Spirit, the warriors, would come back, the buffalo herds would come back, they would get their lands back, the white colonizer would disappear. That is replicated, I mean, as anthropologists have studied throughout societies that collapse. Now, the way we express our crisis cult is through the radical Christian right. Again, a form of magical thinking, which denies evolution, which believes in the rapture, that those believers, when Jesus returns, will be raptured up into heaven. That's a classic example of a crisis cult, so that when things become desperate, you gather in a church, you pray, you carry out Christian ritual, you tend to lash out at a society to purge. You see it in the rhetoric, whether it's against homosexuals, whether it's against undocumented workers, Muslims, a long list of contaminants that will somehow make the society right. All of that has within it the makings of a crisis cult. But crisis cults are what societies do when despair reaches such a level, and we're certainly headed in that direction, when you are unable in any real way to affect the environment or the world around you, then then you wrap yourself in these cocoons of fantasy.
In the article, The Myth of Human Progress, you write in reference to truth that people, quote, get as close as they can before the flames and heat drive them back. The intellectual and moral honesty, Nietzsche wrote, comes with a cost. Those singed by the fire of reality become burnt children, he wrote, eternal orphans in empires of illusion. Chris, if this is the way it's always worked and those who seek truth are constantly ostracized, is humanity just doomed to be subject to empires of illusion?
Well, I'm quoting Nietzsche there about looking down that only artists and philosophers have the capacity to look into what he calls the sort of molten pit of reality, and when they come back out, they find that the wider populace, which is unable to look, can't deal with it. And so I depart a little bit from Nietzsche there. Nietzsche, like Plato, says that you create illusions, myth, in order to explain a reality or help people cope with a reality. Unfortunately, the role of truth tellers in distraught or disturbed societies, and we have our own examples of that, whether it's Noam Chomsky or Ralph Nader or Cornel West, all of them for getting up and speaking an unpleasant truth have been pushed to the fringes of society. And I'm, the liberal class is guilty, maybe even more guilty than that. Stations like MSNBC, which are utterly subservient to the Democratic Party and to the cult of Barack Obama, have kept those voices from us. So it's not just the right, it's the left that are both trading in a kind of false reality. And that's very dangerous, because when you can't confront reality, when your society shuts out those voices that seek to describe what reality is and how it works, then you can't talk about hope, and you can't talk about change, because all hope and change is essentially redirected into a dead political process or redirected into fantasy. I mean, the idea that Barack Obama is going to save us from Wall Street or from the drone wars or from environmental degradation. It's a bit like, all those poor prisoners in the Gulag were writing letters to Uncle Joe Stalin. And that is symptomatic, and I think the United States would be probably a good example of an empire in serious decay and decline. These are qualities that are symptomatic of a society that can no longer has the intellectual and moral health to face hard facts and readjust and carry out forms of self-criticism and self-correction.
That was Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges. Be sure to tune in for part 2 of his interview tomorrow.